All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody, to the San Jose Bike Issues Forum. I'm Ballard, and I run the Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition. And we're just going to go ahead and get started. First of all, thank you for being here. And I want to say, to start off with, we're all experimenting with Zoom. So we just want to say that up front, that we're trying new ways of engaging with our membership and experimenting with different formats. So we beg your forgiveness if anything goes awry, but we want to keep this pretty flexible and just see how it goes. And we really want your feedback when this is all over with. So again, my name is Shiloh Ballard. I run the Bike Coalition. We want to go ahead and get started by seeing who is with us today in the audience. So there are a bunch of SVBC staff behind the curtain that are helping to operate this Zoom call, but one in particular, Tim Wee, I think, is going to put a poll up on the screen, and we'd love for you all to answer that poll so that we get a sense of who is with us today. So Tim, can you get that queued up? All right, so you'll see here, what type of a bicyclist do you consider yourself to be? And there's a couple answers here. I'm not really a bicyclist. I tootle around town for fun. I ride recreationally, or I'm mainly a transportation cyclist, and I go to work and to stores. So what are you? Go ahead and click on your answer. All right, I'm going to say that's good enough. So looks like who we have here today, we have a large chunk of us are recreational bicyclists. Next in line there are folks who ride for transportation purposes. And then we've got a few of us that like to tootle around town, and then a few that don't really consider themselves bicyclists. And all are welcome here today. So thank you for being with us. So in terms of the way that we're going to structure things today, this is the second time that we at the Bike Coalition have done one of these Zoom forums. And we learned from the last one, and what we heard from you all was that you wanted less canned presentation from our presenters and more time to just ask questions and get questions answered. So that's essentially how we have things structured here today. Tim, I think you can go ahead and take the poll down if you want to, or if you're able to. So we have two panelists here from the city of San Jose, Jesse Mintz-Roth and Nick Danty. Both are going to do a very quick 5-minute presentation. And then we've asked you all to submit questions in advance. So a few of you have done that, and we will run through those questions. And then after that, what we're going to be doing is using the chat box to pull in questions and comments that you all submit via the chat box. And I see that some folks are already writing some things in the chat box. Please feel free to be playing along and commenting as we go. We would ask that you be nice and also be aware of just how much space that you're taking up in the chat box. The last one, we had one person in particular that was dominating the chat box, and folks were a little bit annoyed by that. And we do reserve the right to give folks the boot if they're being a little too obnoxious in the chat box. So that is how we plan to do things today. With that, we're gonna go ahead and get started. And we're gonna start with Jesse, who's gonna talk a little bit about the city of San Jose's Vision Zero efforts, followed by Nick Danty, who's going to talk about the city's bike plan. And the thing that we want you all to be keeping in mind as we're doing this is that really at the end of the day, we are hoping you all are here because you want to become more informed, you want to share your own comments, questions, concerns, expertise with our presenters. And at the end of the day, all of us will leave inspired to get more involved with pushing the city of San Jose to be a Biketopia. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Nick. And I'm still showing the poll on my screen. So hopefully someone can take that down.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Jesse Mintz-Roth, and I'm the Vision Zero Program Manager at the City of San Jose Department of Transportation. On the cover of my presentation is the Vision Zero Action Plan, which was taken through City Council in November, January, and February, and was passed on February 11th. You can see in it, there's some images of the Better Bikeway project in downtown San Jose. On this particular report, the point of showing you those images is to talk about what we call quick build construction. And they are a set of materials that we're going to talk about a little bit more in the presentation. So could you go to the next slide, or am I doing my slides, or is it, let's see.
I think Allison is changing the slides for you.
Okay, go ahead then. Okay, so the Vision Zero Action Plan, as I mentioned, was passed on February 11th, and it is a 5-year plan that probably will cost about $18 million. The first year was, in the first year, $6.8 million was dedicated, and so we are beginning the work. Since obviously our plan of what would happen immediately after that changed a little bit starting in March, we did still release our annual data report to City Council. Usually we do it in person at the Transportation and Environment Committee, but this year it came out as an informational memo, and that came out on June 30th, and it is available on our website. Additionally, as part of the Vision Zero Action Plan, we are creating a Vision Zero task force, of which Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition is part. It is also open to the public to attend. And if you go to our website, which is at the bottom of all of our slides, but also listed here, visionzerosj.org, you can find the links for all of the task forces coming up in 2020. You can find the link to the action plan. You can find the link to the informational memo. You can also find the link to our newest crash data. So we have the 5 most recent years of crash data available, and we try to release the most recent full year when we do our annual memo. And so this year we also have sort of our newest, what would you say, like our crash map, the technology involved in the online version is also updated. So that's also a sort of a win for me that I don't know that everyone would appreciate, but in any case, it's our crashes are in more detail this year than they were last year. So to the next slide, please. So San Jose, first off, I should say that the thing that separates Vision Zero from past safety efforts is really a focus on the data. And so, and particularly a focus on fatalities and severe injuries. And when we talk about those, this is our San Jose traffic fatality trend. You can see here that between 2012 and 2015, San Jose's traffic fatalities doubled. The city adopted Vision Zero in 2015. And so after that, the fatalities dropped a little bit, but they reached a peak again last year in 2019. And so we're hoping that this program, through a lot of strategies, which we'll lay out, can bring this number down. Next slide, please. So these graphs were just developed for this year's report, and we wanted to give more fine-grained detail about that 60. And to do so, we wanted to look at the 5-year trend by the types of people, what the people were doing when they died in traffic. And so you can see here that pedestrians or people killed while walking are the biggest group and growing since 2017. And also that motor vehicle occupants are the second biggest group, but they have plateaued really since 2017. And then cyclists and also motorcyclists are the lower numbers, but they, you can see that a fluctuation from 6 to 3 to 7, if you're looking at sort of as a percentage of all, like that seems like a big change, but those numbers have been relatively constant towards the bottom. A lot of our emphasis here ends up being about pedestrians because I think everyone who lives in San Jose knows that walking is not a particularly common mode of transportation. You can get that out of our census data. So, there's a lot of attention to what we can do to improve pedestrian safety through this program, but really all modes of transportation. But I think, in a sense, a new focus on pedestrian safety. So let's move to the next slide. In this slide, we're looking at the median age of those people. So, and as you remember before, of the 268 people who've died in traffic fatalities in San Jose in the last 5 years, 113 of them were pedestrians. And their median age over the last 5 years is 58 years old. And for cyclists, there were 7 of them last year, and I want to say about 25 over the 5-year period. Their median age has risen quite a lot, but as I mentioned before, there aren't that many cyclist fatalities compared to pedestrian fatalities. So last year in 2019, I believe there were 2 people who were around the age of 70, I think even in the same crash. And so that sort of volatile number, with a low number in the overall sample, that impacts the number a lot. However, I would say that it is really important to know that cyclists and pedestrians, the median age of the traffic fatalities in San Jose being older is really important. I think that the history of the safety of transportation safety, traffic safety, a lot of the outreach really focuses on children. And our data indicates that we really should be focusing our outreach on adults and older adults. So those are some of the things that we find from looking at the data. Okay, so the next slide. One of the big questions this year has been, obviously about this unusual situation that we find ourselves in, and how does that impact the data? So in the pandemic period, we've seen a lot fewer people driving. And so we might expect that there would be fewer traffic fatalities, but we've actually found that not to be true. And so there's a lot of concern about speeding, and speeding is one of the top issues in this area. When you have other vehicles on the street, they keep you going at the speed that everyone's going. When you have fewer vehicles on the street, it's a lot easier to speed. Looking at 2020, January to May, compared to the previous 5 years, January to May, 2018 and 2019 were the peak years in traffic fatalities for San Jose. So we're quite concerned about this year as well, even though fewer people are driving. Next slide. Outreach. We have been moving so actually I should say that most of our outreach to date has been in schools. And we have the Walk and Roll program, which was started in 2012 and has expanded from 0 schools to 55 schools in that period. That's part of the Vision Zero program. We also do outreach to different types of people in San Jose. We go to school children, we go work with some of the homeless population, we work with some older adults, but based on the data analysis, we're trying to do more with older adults. So every year we apply for a competitive grant to the Cal 2019 year. We did this campaign, which you see on the bottom here, Drive Slow Seniors Crossing. We brought this campaign from San Francisco, where it was very well regarded, and added the Vietnamese translation and put it on streetlight poles around town and on VTA properties as well. In the current year, which is the 2019-2020 year, we're doing outreach to older adults, and that was intended to be in person at the senior nutrition program locations. But our consultant, which is California Walks, which is the other major advocacy group for transportation issues in San Jose, they have been forced, along with us, to transition to Zoom, which we're doing of trying to find our audience, basically. The same way I think everyone else is, but this is an ongoing thing, and I think we found it now. So I'm sort of I think we're moving in the right direction of how to do it, which is basically to find organizations that are already hosting an event and to include it there. We've gotten this grant. We just learned that we also were awarded this grant next year. So we'll be continuing to do this type of outreach next year. But in addition to our OTS grants, part of the Vision Zero Action Plan is to create a outreach strategy, and we are going to be hiring a consultant to do that. So, slide. During the pandemic, we worked with the department to do a number of responses. I mentioned before that fewer people we did was to disable signal coordination, which is part of what our signals usually do. Usually you may be familiar with driving down a corridor and hitting a bunch of greens in a row, and basically you don't have to stop. So in March, we disabled that. So that it would be a little bit harder to pick up speed. Another thing was concern about touching the pedestrian button in order to get the crossing signal. So we disabled that, and rather we automated the pedestrian phase at 100 signals downtown, and at the locations that we did that, we put up these signs, which you can see on the left. Also, we worked with the city's emergency operations people to do a communications campaign, which is about slowing down and saving lives, and also yard signs that say 20 is plenty. So if you go to the next slide, you can see the slow down, save lives on the back of some VTA buses. And this image also went out as targeted ads to a specific demographic of people that we've learned are more likely to be involved in crashes. So next slide. And this is the image that we are using for the yard signs. So we recently received these. They are printed as double-sided English, Spanish, and English Vietnamese, and we are currently distributing them. So if there's interest in getting one of these, please get in contact with me or my colleague Cordell afterwards. And that's my last slide.
Great. Thank you so much. So we're going to just move right on over to Nick to go ahead and share his presentation. And afterwards, we're going to do a quick poll and then start our Q&A.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nick Danty, and I'm a transportation planner in San Jose's Bicycle and Pedestrian Program, which may later be the Bike, Pedestrian, and Scoot program as we struggle to find our meaning in this new world we're in. But I'm here today to talk about the bike plan. I'm really excited. So yeah, let's get started. Next slide, please. So in 2018, the city began this bike plan project to create a new plan that will replace its existing 11-year-old plan. The vision of the plan is to create a city where people of all ages and abilities and backgrounds feel safe and comfortable biking anywhere in San Jose. Over the last 1.5 years, we've been busy looking at existing conditions, talking with neighbors and community groups, and just seeking to understand the goals of these groups and the city as a whole. Next slide, please. So the goals we defined are seen here. And the first one I'll describe is more biking, so that mode shift goal. And that aligns with the long-term goals in our city's general plan and our climate smart plan, which some of you might be familiar with. Making it safer to ride a bike in San Jose aligns with the city's Vision Zero plan, which Jesse just talked about, in seeking to eliminate all traffic deaths from our roadway. The third point here, apply equity, is to make sure the voices of those in our communities who are traditionally underserved are able to engage and are empowered through this bike plan effort. Next slide, please. So before we really get into the meat of the plan, these are the types of bike lanes that are described in the plan. So I just wanted to go over some key definitions and concepts here. So you don't really need to worry too much about the details on this slide. What's important to note is that later on in the survey, or the presentation, we're going to be talking about the types of bike lanes on the left. So the four bike lanes starting on the left. So there we have a shared use path, which is a traditional trail, separated bike lanes. Those are bike lanes protected by vehicle traffic through some sort of vertical separation device. We have bike boulevards, which are calm neighborhood streets that have also incorporated traffic calming measures, and buffered bike lanes, which you see all over the city today. They dedicate a space to bikes and include an additional painted buffer between the bike lane and the car. And those four concepts sort of define the heart of this plan. Next slide, please. So throughout our outreach phase of this project, we have conducted a survey to see what people are saying about biking in San Jose. And about 1,200 people took the survey. It was made up of 89 questions and was distributed in English, Spanish, and Vietnamese. What's really important about this slide is that 55% of people in San Jose want to bike more. Wow. This is really exciting because it shows that our work is addressing a real demand. We're being proactive, but we are also responding to the desires of the community to have a more interconnected bike network. Next slide, please. Right, so the network that we have developed in the plan is a result of 4 elements, more or less. So on the left, we're looking at related plans. So that includes things like the existing bike plan, Vision Zero, and our citywide trails plan. We overlaid that with a network analysis of our road network. So we looked at collisions and some other data points like level of traffic stress and connectivity between destinations. We looked at low stress connectivity using a bicycle network analysis. And we also integrated community input that came from various advisory committees and community partners. Next slide, please. And so what the development of our network has told us is that San Joseans are comfortable riding in some types of bikeways and not comfortable in others. The same survey I talked about a few slides ago also asked this question, and we can see here that the majority of people would bike more if they used a shared use path or a separated bike lane. And that is why for the bike plan, we are focusing most of our efforts on those types of bikeways. Bike boulevards, to a lesser extent, people feel safe on, but you'll see that the conventional bike lanes are not exactly designed for all ages and abilities. We can move on to the next slide, please. So this slide summarizes the plan's implementation strategy. Pretty cut and dry. I've already talked about the first bullet in advancing the city's mode shift goals. The second bullet here talks about implementing our bike plan through quick and affordable installation, so quick build. Jesse talked about this a little bit, and if you bike anywhere in San Jose, you're probably aware of the protected bike lanes in downtown. Those are quick build projects. The third bullet point here alludes to leveraging other programs with our bike goals. So things like our annual pavement maintenance program, using that to integrate our bike plan designs into the city. And so that happens every year, and it's a really easy way to get bike lanes on the ground quickly. Next slide, please. So as of today, we've released a draft plan for public comment. You can go see that plan on bikesanjose.com. There's a lot of great options there to provide comments on specific streets in your neighborhood. You can comment on the recommendations, and you can also add comments for potential streets that you want. We're nearing the end of the project schedule, as you can see here. And in August, we will take the plan to City Council for review, but you can still comment up until July 19th. If you'd like to receive an update when the City Council date is set, you can email bikesanjose@sanjoseca.gov, and we can provide that in the chat box or in a follow-up email to the participants. Next slide, please. So finally, in addition to creating a network of bike facilities, the plan also recommends policies and programs to achieve the 3 goals of mode shift, safety, and equity that I talked about at the beginning of the presentation. In developing these recommendations, we looked at other cities and the best practices of those cities with high rates of bicycling. So an example of encouragement might include improving wayfinding signs and expanding existing bike to school programs. Policy making could include lowering speed limits and restricting motor vehicle right turns, which is a huge conflict point. And examples of improving process and design include updating our design policies to reflect best practices in bikeway design. And next slide, that's it for the presentation. I guess I will field questions in the breakout rooms.
Awesome. Okay. So I did not mention this before, but I'll mention it now. I did say that we were going to keep things pretty flexible here and make some real-time decisions on how we're going to do formatting. We have some questions that you all have submitted that we want to talk through, and the chat box has been pretty active, so there's lots going on there that we can pull into this conversation. But if things look to be a little dead, then we're going to break out into smaller breakout rooms where folks can chat amongst themselves. So it just depends how this goes. It depends how lively Jesse and Nick are in this conversation and holding our attention. So I'm going to go ahead and cue Jessica on staff at SVBC to do another poll so we can get a sense from you all on this question, which is, what prevents you from riding more? So go ahead and vote. Like we're nearing 40 of 71 folks have voted so far. Keep casting your votes. Looks like things are slowing a little bit, but based on where we're at, it is looking like the winner is the reason that I don't ride more is my bike might get stolen. The number 2 answer looks like I don't feel safe. Then that's followed, then there's a pretty big gap there. Biking takes too long. Bike lanes aren't kept clear. And then kind of trailing behind is don't like being sweaty. I'm not in shape. It's too complicated to coordinate. And then other. And we encourage folks to put stuff in the chat box. So I'm assuming that folks have said what that other is in the chat box. I won't go through that right now, but very interesting to see that bikes getting stolen is the number 1 reason, followed by not feeling safe. Fortunately, the city of San Jose has a bike parking program to install more racks, although that might not help people still feel like their bike is safe. So with that, I'm gonna jump into our questions here. Starting with, Nick, you had mentioned, you had a slide up there that showed the different kinds of bike lanes. And there was some activity in the chat box about the difference between a shared bike lane and the definition of a bike boulevard. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that, but more importantly, I was hoping you could talk about what is it from an academic, a data-driven academic research point of view that we are learning is the most effective type of bike facility and getting the, all ages, all abilities segment of the population to ride?
Sure. So to the first question, the difference between shared streets and bike boulevards is that bike boulevards incorporate traffic control devices into their designs, such as speed humps, traffic circles, chicanes, and sometimes concrete islands. So ways that just slow traffic down even more and make it more comfortable for people to bike. These streets are generally pretty calm already, but we want to continue to keep speeds down, and we want to divert people off of these bike boulevards to maybe streets that have higher vehicle volume. A shared lane, shared street just has a marking, maybe a share the road sign. It doesn't really offer that much in terms of bike protection and lowering speeds. From a data-driven standpoint, though, we take a lot of our guidance from NACTO and other cities in the country, but the sort of the overwhelming response that we've seen is that people are more comfortable biking in protected bike lanes. They want that separation from traffic. Now, there are people out there who bike for different reasons, and we're focused on the people that are interested but concerned. Some of you might have seen that title somewhere, like a graphic that shows the different types of cyclists. The interested and concerned folks, they want that sort of protection. A buffered bike lane isn't going to cut it. And there was a study that NACTO has on its site that about 80% of people would feel more comfortable using those types of facilities. So that's what we're striving for. We're trying to make that our default. But there's a lot of other feasibility concerns that get brought up during bikeway development.
Thank you. And I'll just add, because we at the Bike Coalition, we also look at the data in terms of what public opinion research shows, and it jives with the survey data that you put forward. When we ask folks, we understand that fear is one of the top reasons people, or safety is one of the top reasons people don't ride as much as they would like to. And when we ask folks, well, under what conditions would you not feel as fearful? They always come back with, well, a trail. I would love to ride on a trail everywhere. And wouldn't we all? Unfortunately, building trails throughout our city, especially in California with the stringent rules and regulations and CEQA that we have, it's just incredibly expensive and almost impossible to build trails everywhere. So instead, what we at the Bike Coalition advocate is creating that trail-like feeling on our street network. So exactly what you were saying with the protected or separated bike lanes. So thank you for that. A related question that came in beforehand is, so if we are having separated bike lanes where you have some sort of physical barrier there, and in the downtown area with the Better Bikeways network, it's bollards, and in some cases it's parking protected. But all of us who ride bikes frequently get frustrated, especially in the fall, when all the leaves, fall off the trees and they're in the bike lanes. And if you've got a protected bike lane, how do you keep those bike lanes clean? So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that took a little bit of time to develop a solution to. We really just have a small street sweeper. We had to buy I think it's like a 6 or 7 foot wide street sweeper that can fit into those protected bike lanes. We also have the folks at Groundworks who are downtown, and they have devices as well that sweep up leaves. But as we continue to expand these protected bike lanes throughout the city, Groundworks doesn't cover that sort of area. So we're going to need to deploy at least one street sweeper, probably multiple, depending on budget and direction from senior leadership. But that's the way to do it.
So little tiny street sweepers. Do you know how much
Exactly.
those cost? Do you know off the top of your head how much that costs?
I do not know, unfortunately. I can get that for you though.
Yep.
Maybe let's see. I'll see if my colleagues have written anything into the chat box here.
Yeah. Well, and since we were talking about trails, we did have a question come up in the chat box about the Los Gatos Creek Trail and the connection to the Guadalupe Trail. So, if you're coming from Los Gatos or you're coming from North San Jose, there's a gap around the Diridon station. So I don't know if it's you or Nick, if you can just comment on what is the plan for that area? Are we ever going to get a trail that connects those?
I cannot speak about that. That is a Parks owned and operated segment there, and I'm not sure what kind of plans they have for connecting that to Diridon. I have seen lots of old plans that show the connection, but I don't know what sort of progress has been made. I would guess that with the development of the Diridon plan and all this money being funneled into that area of town, that there must be some sort of program timeline, but I do not know off the top of my head.
Yeah. Jesse, do you happen to know? I mean, I know a little bit, but I would defer to you all first.
Sorry, I was muted. Actually, no, I don't know about that either. We're increasing. I guess it's probably fair to say that we're working more with the Trails program, but I don't think we know their long-term plans.
And Martin commented in the chat box, and I'll also highlight, Martin had the best answer to the poll, the question, what keeps you from riding your bike more? He said absolutely nothing keeps him from riding his bike more. But there is a plan to connect the trail, but it's not a trail necessarily. You do have to go up on street and take the streets for a little bit to connect. As at least that's as I understand it. Because Google is coming into that area of town, as you both noted, there is great hope that with this influx of investment into the area that we can actually revisit those plans and get a true trail connection that's on the trail the entire way. So fingers crossed, but that raises an issue. We did talk about whether or not we should invite the Trails folks into this panel today, and instead we opted for keeping it to 2 panelists, and that potentially in the future we can do a session on just trails and learn more about that. So I'm going to go here to Jesse. We're going to talk a little bit about Vision Zero and enforcement. This is something, in our current state of affairs that folks are talking more and more about, and this notion of defunding the police. And those of us in the bike community, we have this thing called the 3-foot rule, which we love, and we are very vulnerable out there, and many in our community are interested in stronger ways of enforcing the law. At the same time, there has been a long movement in the Vision Zero, within the Vision Zero movement, to back off on this notion of using law enforcement as a primary tool for keeping the streets safe. And recently, the Safe Routes to Schools Network and the Vision Zero Network have officially backed off on using enforcement as their go-to tool for keeping the streets safe. So I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about this tension within the bike movement and in how we keep our streets safe.
Sure, there's a lot to say here. And I think there's some useful framing is that in the transportation world, there is something called the 5 E's, which are education, encouragement, enforcement, evaluation, and engineering. Enforcement was one of them. And as Shiloh was saying, there's been a movement to go away from that. I personally am in favor of going away from that. I don't know why we need everything to begin with E even. But in the Vision Zero Action Plan, which I didn't talk about much in my presentation because I was trying to give the short version, I just wanted to give this audience the data. We have 6 priority action areas. One of them is enforcement, but I think that it would be helpful to give a little history of enforcement, traffic enforcement in San Jose. So I came to San Jose a year and a half ago from New York City, which is a very different scene in terms of how this work goes. One of the biggest differences is enforcement. And so here, the traffic enforcement unit at the police department had fallen in staff from after the last recession. So basically 2010 to 2018, the staff of the traffic enforcement unit had gone from something like 48 to 5 people. So traffic enforcement is not a big resource here in San Jose. And there had been some question about how to even talk about that because, and this is before the current cultural moment. So before the current cultural moment, we have San Jose's traffic fatalities doubling, as I mentioned in my slides. Between 2012 and 2015, it went from 29 to 60. To give you some scale of why that number doubling from 29 to 60 is of note, particularly to me, is that in San Francisco, which has a population of 150,000 fewer people than here, the number of traffic fatalities in 2019 was 29. And 29 in San Jose is the number of pedestrian fatalities. So, you know, the number going up here is of great concern, and what do you do about it? And one of the things that we had looked at is that the enforcement staff had really dropped to 1/10 of its previous size in the last 10 years. And, you know, and so basically, like, what should we do? And so I think when you come into the current cultural moment, it's, do you increase it? And I guess I should talk a little bit about some of the other options in the field. In California, San Jose and San Francisco in 2017 tried to pilot automated speed enforcement, AKA speed cameras. And that did not work out. Basically, the 2 cities tried to work together to get support for the enabling legislation to do the program, and they didn't get it. The San Jose Police Department was supportive of the program, but the California Highway Patrol Union was not. And so that's basically where that story pressed pause. And then if you come ahead from 2017 to now, a number of cities do have automated speed enforcement in other states. And the most interesting one is in New York City. And so they did a pilot over, I think, a few years and basically found it worked really well. And, you know, I think there's a lot of, I can tell you about that pilot. It's basically around schools only, during school hours only. And then there's some other questions about sort of equitable placement of them, what the sort of penalty is if one is caught. I think that we can also now reflect that if you're penalized through a program, either a camera or an officer given ticket, that there's differing questions of what happens to you through through the enforcement system, through the criminal side. So I think there's a lot of big questions for us, but automated speed enforcement may be the most promising one, because I can tell you that in the space that I work in, basically talking to other Vision Zero cities about this question right now, the people who work for the cities that have automated speed enforcement report that they don't have a sort of equity-based backlash. However, they also they haven't written the reports yet that are about the race data. So it's not like the perfect place to say that that's the thing that we should all do. It is promising. So I think that there are a lot of ways that we could figure out how to lay out the program and where would be an equitable placement of the cameras if we were able to do them. So I think that might be a good place to stop for now.
Yeah, well, and I think that was great, and I'd love to probe a little bit more. First, I know that I think it's Oakland DOT is looking at doing traffic enforcement. I don't know if you mentioned that in your comments, but it'd be interesting to hear a little bit more about that if you get pulled over, it's by someone who would issue a parking ticket as opposed to an armed officer. And so that concept. The other thing I wanted to mention that you just to talk a little bit more and probe a little deeper on is you mentioned placement. And that is when we were working on this bill with Assemblymember Chu, this pilot with San Francisco and the city of San Jose, when you're looking at the city of San Jose and where the Vision Zero corridors are, they are where?
Okay, so yes. So the Vision Zero corridors overlap heavily with what the MTC calls communities of concern, which is to say, if you know your San Jose districts, District 7 is the district, which is south and east of downtown, that has the most fatal and severe injuries, which we refer to in our world as KSI. So it is an interesting point that the faster roads are the ones that have more KSI, which fatal and severe injuries, and they are not equally distributed around town. So if you were, there's one way that you could do your placement of cameras, which is to say that you're going to place them in the places that have the most fatal and severe injuries. If you did that, you'd be placing them in the districts that are also communities of concern. So then you kind of have the issue of, well, there's two sides to that. One, there's the people who live there. Two, there's that they carry a lot of regional traffic. So I don't know offhand necessarily that people who live there would be more likely to get the tickets. But I think that if you look at, for example, what New York City did and placed them around schools, I mean, I assume that they put them around schools in every district. That would be perhaps a strategy that would be more equitable in terms of placing them around the city. So I would say that we have not gone down this thought path that far here, because obviously we're not able to do them. But when we get to that place, these are some of the thoughts that you could have.
Yeah, thanks for highlighting that. So just in sum, for folks who are following that, the areas of the city where we have our most dangerous streets are in our communities of concern. That's an Metropolitan Transportation Commission terminology for low-income communities of color. So to then conclude that we need to have automated speed enforcement, speed safety cameras in those areas where it is most dangerous, and ticketing the people who live or drive through those areas, essentially one could conclude we are choosing to over-police in an area that already feels over-policed and terrorized by the police and can afford it the least when things go wrong, both financially and from a actual physical safety perspective. So for those reasons, when we were running this bill or helping to put this bill through, that was one of the big issues was, well, that doesn't feel right. And so how do you work through that issue? So I just wanted to put a finer point on that. All right, well, we want.
If I could raise one, I'm just looking at the chat. One of the things that came up in the chat that I think is interesting is that the New York City example of placing automated speed cameras around schools seems unrelated to the median age of bike ped fatalities in San Jose. That is true. But one of the really interesting things in the world of traffic safety is that politically speaking, you get the most support if you do things when you're protecting children. So that's one of the difficulties in my profession, honestly, because our data is really saying that we should do a lot more focusing on older adults, but there's culturally, if you talk to almost anyone about safety, they will tell you that some location near a school is the place that you should focus on. So, so that's just an interesting one I saw in the notes. Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, so we've got a lot of good questions here. One, going back to the survey data that Nick had presented, someone had asked a question about that. Was it 55% said that they want to ride more of the 1,200 that were surveyed? And also I'm curious, what was the method used of surveying folks?
So it's a random sample. So it's more than the 1,200 survey respondents. It was not just directed at the 1,200 that were surveyed. It wasn't it was more of a voluntary response, or sorry, not a voluntary response survey. They wouldn't have seen those questions unless they were in the random sample taken by the polling firm. Did that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I think I got
okay.
That. There was also a question, everybody's, Oakland implemented a slow streets network, 79 miles of streets that they're restricting to cars. And I'm wondering if you guys can comment a little bit about whether San Jose plans to adopt a slow streets network. And I know the answer to this question, it's a depressing answer, but I'll ask it anyway, just to put you guys on the hot seat.
I mean, I don't know if it matters which one of us answers that one, which is basically that that is not being pursued here. I think that I don't know that we have a really, juicy answer per se. One of the major things that I've heard about it is just that we don't have the density that a lot of other cities have. And so in denser cities, recreating is, happens in more centralized locations. And so the sort of need for, the idea that you might have to close the street so that we can each have 6 feet to pass each other is greater. And here, that's less of a concern for most neighborhoods.
I will add that we actually just submitted a grant application to NACDO to help potentially implement a pilot program on the San Antonio Street overcross to try to close that down. Now it has not been approved. This is just submitted to NACDO the other day, but it's something that we're shooting for. It's kind of the only way I can think of lately that we're moving towards these shared streets, slow streets.
Right. Well, so we have about 6 minutes left, so I'm going to go to the lightning round here because there's so many good questions that it'd be great to get to. One of them is there's so many different planning efforts going on just in San Jose generally, but in the downtown area. I'm wondering if you can help folks understand how all these planning efforts relate to each other, and in particular, the role of the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Commission in helping to inform lots of these planning efforts.
I mean, I think the broad answer is that we're trying to get people out of their cars, whether it is a plan for mass transit or reducing parking requirements for multifamily buildings, more bike lanes, or pedestrian safety. It all goes to this goal of increasing our mode shift away from automobiles. And the BPAC is sort of our point for interacting with the rest of the community, sort of getting our plans out there and then having the BPAC receive comments from people, giving them back to us.
Great. I have a question here on, especially at this time during COVID where we're figuring out community engagement. Any change, I come from the affordable housing world, and any change is always hard. And you want to upset a community, tell them that you're going to bring poor people and you're going to house poor people in their community. People always are opposed to affordable housing. But bike lanes can have the same effect, especially when you're talking about potentially changing a parking configuration in a downtown or a neighborhood business district where there's a small mom and pop shop that relies on people being able to drive right up and get out and get stuff. We face this with the Better Bikeways Network. We face this on Park Avenue. Can you comment on just generally how the city approaches community engagement to make sure that community of voice is involved early on in helping to shape what the future of bike infrastructure will look like in certain areas?
So I can speak from the perspective of the pavement maintenance program, which is sort of the wheelhouse that I operate in. And we have a standard operating procedure for how those projects progress. And what we do is we will create draft design plans, and then we will discuss those plans with the council office. They'll kind of give us their firsthand, experiences with each street. And then they will forward us to community groups and neighborhood associations that would also have some important stories to tell about, let's say, parking or something like that, dumpsters. From there, we'll usually interact either via email or, again, this was prior to COVID, but we'd have community meetings. If it was a parking removal project, we would take a little bit of time to solicit input as to how this parking was used and what, for example, business owners might feel about taking it away. Sometimes we would incorporate their feedback into the plans. Meridian Avenue, for instance, we removed over 1,000 parking spots, but we heard very strongly from one block on that avenue that they were going to have to walk too far away from their homes at night in order to access their homes. So we try to offer as much advance notice as we can, but a lot of times we use our professional judgment to make decisions about what types of bike lanes and to add where.
Great, thank you. And that's been my experience with the city, is when folks have concerns, they get addressed. And I've watched DOT go out and do site visits and talk with business owners and really understand parking issues and try to come to mutually beneficial solutions. We have 2 minutes left. I want to ask one final question, and then we're going to wrap it up. And as we're wrapping it up, if people can put in the chat box what their takeaways were from this and what their next steps are for getting more involved, that'd be great to share that with everybody. But the question for you both is, what is your advice to the Bike Coalition and folks here in terms of how we can best support the city of San Jose in quickly building out a safe streets network and streets that are great for people to live life joyfully through the bicycle? What should we do? How do we help? And who do we call? Who do we call when we've got problems?
I would say it's the general 1 minute answer, less than 1 minute answer to your first question is advocate. Advocate for the city you'd like to see. That's, generally speaking, a great idea. Who should you call? Actually, on my staff, there's a great guy named Cordell Bailey. Many of you may have met him. And you can email him at cordell.bailey@sanjoseca.gov. I'm sure Shiloh has his email address if you didn't get that. And also my web address for my projects is visionzerosj.org. And I believe we have his email on there, but if we don't, we'll add it tomorrow. We're doing, also as a slight answer to the last question, we're doing more outreach work on other projects, including bike work, but you may be seeing more of us in the community.
I would also say, I would echo all of that and say to flood your council members' inbox with ideas. Neighborhood associations keep 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 your membership with SVBC. They're a great advocacy group. You guys are doing so much to progress our goals in the city. But also, I would just email me. I can put my name in the chat box. I really enjoy getting emails from members of the public, regardless of the comment, and I will do everything I can to get an answer for you. Sometimes it's not feasible, other times it is. So I will leave that right here, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Well, thank you so much to you both for joining us tonight. In wrapping things up, I just want to reiterate those last comments that we convene this because we want folks to come and learn and be inspired to get more involved. And we will be following up with each of the participants via email. Please watch out for that email because it will have next steps and the ways that you can get involved. Sandhya on our staff here, she's been working behind the scenes. She's running our San Jose team. We're collecting 100 voices of San Jose advocates who can push the city harder and faster to get all this stuff built. So join SVBC, join these efforts to make sure the streets are safe for us all. And with that, thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Hi.